I stood behind the chair, the one I used to call mine. It had a small scratch on the backrest from when Ellie accidentally scraped it with her toy truck. I'd always meant to sand it down, but I left it. A mark of life. I used to sit there, every evening, folding napkins, spooning mashed potatoes onto plates, reminding them to chew slower. But today I didn't sit. I just rested my hands on the top rail, the wood warm from the sun pouring through the window. The room was full, voices overlapping, laughter bouncing off walls I helped paint. Plates clinked, silverware scraped. And yet I stood there, still, like furniture no one noticed anymore. I looked down at the seat cushion, once covered in flour from baking days, now untouched. I felt the tug in my chest, not loud, not sharp, just dull. The kind of ache you get from holding something too long that's already let go of you. I used to be the center of this table. Now, I was orbiting quietly around it. I think it's time I moved out, I said, steady and soft, almost like offering a weather report. At first, no one responded, just the clatter of someone reaching for the green beans. Then the laughter came, light, amused, like I'd just made a clever joke. My daughter-in-law smiled. "Oh, stop. Where would you even go?" My grandson giggled, ketchup on his cheek. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Their laughter didn't hit me like a slap. It floated down, slow, like dust, settling in the corners of a room I once kept spotless. I smiled too, out of habit, nodding along like we were all in on something warm and harmless. But I felt it, the shift, small, internal, but certain. Something inside me stood up, even though I stayed rooted to the floor. I looked at the chair again, and this time, it didn't look like mine at all. I let my eyes scan the table, faces I knew better than my own, mouths moving, heads nodding. But my son didn't look up. His thumb kept swiping across his phone, head tilted down, absorbed in someone else's story. That did it. That one small thing. Not a word. Not even a glance. Just nothing. I remembered when he used to beg for one. More story at bedtime. Now, I couldn't even get his attention with the sentence I'd been holding in my bones for years. I stood there, feeling the heat of the sun on my back, the weight of being dismissed without a single act of dismissal. It was just an absence, and that stung more than any argument ever could. There was more I could have said. About the birthday. Parties I still remembered, even when they forgot. About the casseroles I made even after they started ordering in. About the way I folded his undershirts the same way his father liked them. But I didn't say any of that. I looked at their faces, the ones still chuckling. I heard the ticking clock behind me, louder than any laugh. My lips parted like maybe, but no. I swallowed the rest of the sentence. I knew what came next. The awkward silence, the polite shrug, the way the air would grow cold around me, like I'd said too much again. So I stayed quiet. And somehow, that silence echoed louder than anything I could have spoken. As I turned toward the hallway, I let my fingers drift across the wall. The paint has bubbled slightly in places. Years ago, I had covered it in the kids' drawings, crayon people with two big eyes and lopsided hearts. I'd kept them up long after the tape lost its stick. Now the wall was bare, just faint outlines, where sun-faded paper used to be. My fingertips traced the grooves. It felt like touching old skin, familiar, tired. I used to wipe that wall down every week. Now it smelled of age and lemon cleaner and something fading. I paused at the corner. My shadow stretched ahead of me, thin and quiet. Even the house seemed ready for me to go, not with cruelty, just indifference. And that somehow felt even heavier. I walked slowly back toward the table. They were still laughing, still talking, passing dishes, pouring iced tea as if nothing had happened. Maybe for them, nothing had. But for me, something had shifted beneath the surface. Not anger, not spite. Resolve, the kind that grows from years of being too polite to cry during dinner. The kind that builds like sediment, quiet, steady, permanent. Smiled, nodded, even made a small joke about forgetting the rolls, but in my mind, I was already folding the quilts. I was checking the boxes in the attic. I was planning how many trips it would take to carry out what was mine. No one saw it. No one noticed. But inside me, something had just moved. And this time, it wasn't going back. I eased myself down onto the old porch swing, third slat from the end, my spot. The wood groaned a little beneath me, familiar and forgiving. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug of coffee, letting the steam curl into the morning air like the breath I'd been holding all night. From here, I used to watch them play. Bare, feet on the sidewalk, chalk dust on their knees, chasing fireflies with mason jars in hand. Back then, someone was always laughing. Someone always needed a Band-Aid or a second helping. My chair, this porch, it held stories. They were loud and messy and beautiful. Now, it's mostly stillness. A bird chirped somewhere to my left. The porch rail was still damp with dew. I smiled at the way the air smelled, like damp earth and the lilac bush I'd planted near the steps. Footsteps echoed from inside, but no one looked out. No one noticed me sitting here. I took a sip and exhaled. The laughter still came. It just passed by now, like wind I couldn't catch anymore. The wind chimes swayed gently in the morning breeze, soft clinks of copper against copper, a sound that once felt like music. I'd hung them years ago, just after John passed. Picked them out myself at a little roadside shop with chipped paint and kind eyes. Copper tubes with little blue glass beads that caught the light in the afternoon sun. I used to sweep this porch every morning, and the chimes would sing to me like they were glad to see me. They twinkled with every movement, of wind, of memory, of presence. Now they sang to no one. I stood there listening, holding a half-cold mug in one hand. The sound was still beautiful. But it wasn't mine anymore, just another sound this house made, like the faucet dripping, the fridge humming. They'd forgotten me, those chimes, or maybe time had. Either way, they danced without knowing who I was. I reached out, gave the lowest pipe a gentle tap. It chimed once. Then it was quiet, just like me. I heard them coming before I saw them, shoes shuffling, backpack zippers jingling, a burst of laughter that quickly faded. The door swung open, and my grandson stepped out, phone in one hand, earbuds tucked in. He didn't look at me. He didn't even pause, just walked right past, mumbling something I couldn't catch. I opened my mouth to say hello, but closed it again. A moment later, my daughter-in-law followed, her keys clinking as she hurried behind him. She gave me a polite nod, the kind you give to the mailman or the neighbor you don't really know. And then the door slammed shut behind them. No one sat beside me. No one said, "Want to come with us?" No one even asked if I was okay. I used to be the first person they'd run to, their safe spot. Now I'm just here. I looked down at the porch beneath my feet. The wood was warm in the sun. But inside, I was cold in a way that didn't ask to be warmed. It's strange how peace can feel like erasure. I kept the peace. That's what mothers do, right? I keep it, quietly, carefully. I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I gave them space when they needed it, even when I didn't know why they needed it, even when I needed something back. Over time, I started talking less. Not because I had less to say, but because I wasn't sure anyone was listening. The porch swing still creaked under me. The breeze was kind. A cardinal hopped onto the railing, its feathers bright against the fading wood. I sat here, just as I had for years. And yet, I was invisible. Not unwanted, just unseen. There's a difference, but it still hurts. I know they love me, in their way. But love isn't the same as presence. Love isn't the same as asking, "How are you really doing, Mama?" I rocked, slowly, back and forth. I held the space. I always had. But today, I felt like nothing but a shadow keeping their world quiet. There was a time, Lord, I can still smell it, when Sundays meant cinnamon and apple pie cooling on the porch. I'd wear my old blue apron, the one with the torn pocket and flower stitched into every thread. The whole house would smell like sugar and stories. Little fingers would sneak out, one by one, giggling as they stole crust edges or warm apple slices. Before dinner, I pretended not to notice. That was part of the ritual. Back then, this porch was a place of joy, of sweetness, of stolen treats and shared secrets. Now, the only thing cooling out here is my tea. I sat down again, resting my hand on the armrest that still had a dent from my ring, tapping it while I waited for timers to ding. The breeze lifted the edge of a dishcloth I'd forgotten to bring in. I closed my eyes. I could still smell the pie, but it was just a memory now, soft, sweet, and far away. I walked the hallways last night after everyone went to bed. The house creaked the same way it always had. The same floorboard in the hallway still sang under my heel. But it didn't feel like my song anymore. This house used to have my rhythm, my routines, my scent, my warmth. Now it's louder, brighter, fuller, but not with me. I passed the bookshelf and ran my finger along the spines of cookbooks no one opened. They used to be covered in sauce stains and notes. Now they sit like artifacts of a woman no one asks about. Even here on the porch, where I once held court with lemonade and warnings about bee stings, I feel like a stranger. But I remember. I remember who I was here. And that remembering, that's power. I may not be asked to stay. I may not be missed when I'm gone. But I haven't forgotten myself, and I won't. I was just passing the hallway, on my way to drop the folded towels in the closet, when I heard her. Her voice was soft, like she didn't want to wake the baby. She's just extra baggage. That was it. One sentence. And yet it hit me like a cold breeze seeping through a cracked window in winter. I stopped mid-step, my hand settling. Against the hallway wall, fingers pressing into the old paint, like maybe it could hold me up. The wall felt thinner than I ever realized. Like it too, I had heard too much over the years and was starting to give in. The words didn't stab. No, they soaked in, slow and thick, like fog curling around my ribs. I stood there, rooted, while their laughter faded into silence. My heart opened wider than it had in months, and not in a good way. Sometimes it's not the volume of a word that breaks you. It's the truth you didn't want to believe was already there. I turned around and went back into the laundry room. There was nothing else to do. The towels were still warm from the dryer, soft with lavender-scented sheets I bought myself. I pulled one out, shaking it gently before folding the edges to corners the way I always had. The way she liked it. I didn't stop folding. My hands kept moving even as the ache in my chest made it hard to breathe. The motions were familiar, safe almost, like a lullaby in reverse. A part of me still needed to do it, still needed to be of use. The laundry room light hummed above me, casting a soft yellow glow across the pile. I folded their bath towels, their dishcloths, the pajamas she always threw in with the towels, even though I told her they'd pill faster that way. I folded everything she gave me, even her indifference. Some things, I guess, you just do on muscle memory. I reached the bottom of the basket, and there it was, the last towel. Pink, worn soft. Edges still neat from the stitching I did myself. Her name, Rachel, was sewn into the hem in looping cursive thread. I ran my thumb across it like tracing an old scar I'd forgotten I had. I remember sitting by the fireplace that winter, embroidering each letter while the stew bubbled in the kitchen. It was a gift, a housewarming one. She hugged me when I gave it to her. "Thank you, Mom," she said. "And now?" Now she calls me baggage. I held the towel close to my chest for a moment, eyes burning, heart slow and heavy. I still remembered the warmth of that moment, the softness in her eyes, and yet here I was, folding her towels in the quiet, wondering where that version of her went. I made this towel with love. I don't know what she sees when she uses it. But I know what I see now, and it's not family. I tiptoed down the hallway, the laundry basket hugged close to my chest. Not because it was heavy, just because I didn't want to make a sound. The floorboards creak near the hallway clock, so I avoided that spot. I knew every squeak in this house. That's what happens when you walk a place long enough in silence. My sadness didn't want witnesses. It wanted to hush. I placed the basket down at the end of the hall, next to the linen closet, and took a breath. Not a deep one, just enough to feel something. Even my sighs were quiet. I could hear the ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the fridge, the faint sound of someone turning in bed. I wasn't trying to be noble. I just didn't want to wake the house. That's what mothers do, even when they're hurting. We carry it all, even the grief, in the dark, so others can rest, even if we can't. I sat on the edge of the bed, not bothering to turn on the light. Moonlight slipped in through the curtains, silvering the blankets. The sheets were cool against my legs. I didn't sob, didn't make a sound. I just let the tears come, slow and steady, like water dripping from a faucet too tired to shut off completely. My pillow caught it all. This wasn't the kind of grief that wails. This was the quiet cousin, the kind that drapes over your shoulders like an old wet coat. Not heavy enough to crush you, but heavy enough that you forget how it felt to stand straight. I've cried over loss before, but this was something else. It was being in a house I helped build, a family I poured into, and feeling like an afterthought, like a ghost still setting the table. I didn't make a sound, but inside I cracked, just a little, and I didn't even bother wiping the tears. Wait, she used to call me Mom. It was in the kitchen. She hugged me from behind, arms around my waist while I stirred sauce. "You feel like home," she said once. I believed her. I believed that moment, that warmth, that softness in her eyes. It wasn't fake, or at least, I hope it wasn't. Now I think maybe it was just a season. Maybe she needed me back then. Maybe I filled a hole, and when that hole sealed, I became extra. I still have the birthday card she gave me the first year they moved in. To the mother I never had. I kept it in the recipe box with the cinnamon rolls she liked. I looked at it the other day, held it in my lap like a relic. Did she mean it? Did I change, or did she? I don't know what hurts more, believing it was real or realizing it no longer is. Either way, she doesn't call me that anymore. Every afternoon that week, I walked to the mailbox like it was something I was doing casually, just a habit, but inside I was holding on to a tiny thread of hope. I didn't speak out loud. I imagined the envelope, pink maybe, or blue, with stickers on the corners, and her messy handwriting spelling out Grandma. I could almost see it in my hands. But day after day, it was empty. Just circulars and bills. No card, no note, no scribbled, "See you soon." Each time I opened that little metal door and found nothing, it felt a little heavier. Not the box itself, but the weight of being skipped over. On the last day, it started to drizzle. I didn't even have mail to pretend to check. I just stood there a moment, letting the rain land gently on my shoulders. I closed the mailbox quietly. It creaked like it was saying what I couldn't. I walked back inside slower than usual. The gift had been wrapped for over a week, pink paper with tiny gold stars, her favorite. I found a dress in the softest fabric I could, with a little ribbon at the waist and sleeves that would twirl when she spun. I tied the bow myself, neat and centered. I used the sparkly ribbon I saved for special things. I set it gently on the kitchen table, like it was a guest waiting for someone to walk in and say, "You remembered." But the hours passed, and then the day. I dusted around it, relit the candle near the fruit bowl, made tea, did the crossword. But I didn't move the gift. It sat there like a question with no answer, like something beautiful made for no one. Eventually, I pushed it to the side so I could set my teacup down, but I didn't put it away. I wasn't ready to let go of it. I was sipping my tea when I saw it, just scrolling a little, looking at the weather and a few recipe videos. Then there it was. A birthday post, balloons in shades of lavender and pink, glitter on the cake. My granddaughter, front and center, smiling wide with frosting on her chin and a crown tilted slightly on her head. They were all tagged. My son, my daughter-in-law, her little friends, even the neighbor, but not me. Not even a wish grandma were here. I stared at the screen. The photos were bright, like they were lit from the inside. But the glow didn't reach me. I blinked, sipped my tea again. It wasn't anger I felt. No, it was hollow, like someone had quietly scooped out the part of me that expected anything and replaced it with silence. When my son came home later, I was still at the table, drying the same teacup with a dish towel I didn't need to use. He said, "Hey, Ma, how was your day?" I smiled. "Quiet. Yours?" "Busy," he said, setting his keys in the bowl like always. "You made dinner already?" I nodded, folding the towel. "Left some on the stove." He didn't mention the party. Didn't say anything about cake or candles or who came and who didn't. And I didn't ask, because I already knew. The silence told me everything. I gripped the tea mug a little tighter, just to keep my hands from shaking. "Smells good," he said, walking to the fridge. I just nodded again. I wasn't mad. I wasn't going to cry. I was just somewhere else inside, somewhere they don't check anymore. I moved the gift from the table to the chair beside me. Just closer. I don't know why. Maybe I needed it near. I rested my hand on top of it. The paper had a small crease on one side from where I'd nudged it the night before. I smoothed it gently, like you'd brush a wrinkle out of a memory. I closed my eyes and imagined her face, how she would have gasped when she opened it. "Oh, Grandma," she would have said, maybe spun around in it right there in the kitchen. I let myself have that moment. Let it breathe. Let it stay a little longer than it should have. Sometimes, imagination is all we have. And sometimes, it's enough to get through a quiet afternoon. I didn't cry. I just sat with it, like a story that didn't get read aloud. She's too young to know. She doesn't realize who wasn't there. Doesn't know that I ironed the dress, or waited by the phone, or checked the mailbox with quiet hope. And maybe that's better. Childhood shouldn't carry the weight of adult silence. But one day, she might wonder. She might ask. And I hope, when that time comes, she understands. That love isn't always the person in the pictures. Sometimes it's the one sitting alone at the kitchen table, holding a gift that never got given. The kind of love that shows up, even when it's not asked for. I looked out the window as the rain softened, streaking the glass in quiet lines. The light outside had turned golden, and in that moment, I let it go. Not the love. Just waiting. He was just a boy with a rake back then, skinny arms, 2 big sneakers, and a nose sunburned every other week. I used to watch from the kitchen window as he tackled our yard like it was a battlefield, leaves flying everywhere. His mom said he needed discipline. I thought he just needed pie, so I paid him in slices, apple mostly, a scoop of vanilla if it was extra hot, and lemonade that had more sugar than lemon. Now here he was, holding the diner door open for me like it was second nature. Hair slicked, suit pressed, shoes I could see my reflection in. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Connor," he said, grinning, like we shared a secret. "Roger," I blinked. "Look at you," he chuckled. "They let me pretend I know things now." He motioned me inside, and I stepped through, and just like that, without planning it, we were sitting down for coffee like it was a Sunday afternoon in 2003. We hadn't even ordered yet when he leaned back and grinned. "You still make that?" "Pie," I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it caught me off guard. The sound surprised me, almost like I'd forgotten it lived in me. "Sometimes," I said. "Only for people who earn it." He smirked and pointed at himself. "I cleared a lot of leaves, you know, and you crushed my flower beds more than once." Minor details. We both smiled then, and the years between us softened like warm dough. He remembered, after all this time. I wasn't just someone's mother-in-law or a shadow in someone else's house. I was someone who made good pie, someone who used to matter in small, delicious ways, and in that moment, it was enough. We talked like no time had passed. That's the best way I can describe it. It was like sitting on a porch swing, awkward for a second, then suddenly your body remembers how to sway. I told him about the house, how quiet it was, not peaceful quiet, lonely quiet, how I'd started to feel like furniture. There, but not really seen. I said it slowly, watching his eyes, wondering if it was too much. But he didn't blink, didn't glance away, just nodded. Let the space between us hold the weight without rushing to fill it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That's not right." "No," I said. "It's not. But it's where I'm at." The booth cushion beneath me felt warm, not just from the sunlight, but from the comfort of being heard. I didn't even realize how long I'd been waiting to be asked anything real. But that morning, someone did, and that was more than I expected. He stirred his coffee slowly, spoon clinking gently, against the side of the mug. No rush, just motion. I'd stopped talking by then. There wasn't much left to say, but his eyes stayed soft, focused, like he was letting it all settle in instead of skipping past the hard parts. "You know," he finally said, "I've met a lot of folks who feel invisible, but you—" He shook his head gently. "You deserve better than that." I looked at him, this boy I used to send home with lemon bars and plastic containers, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a while. Understanding, real, quiet, respectful understanding. He didn't pity me. He didn't fix me. He just saw me. And in a world where I'd started to feel like wallpaper, that meant more than he probably knew. He leaned in a little, his elbows on the table, his voice lower. Not like a lawyer now, more like a son. "You." "No," he said. "You have more rights than you think." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't want a battle." He shook his head. "It's not about fighting, it's about being respected." I didn't respond right away. Just stared at my coffee, watching the cream swirl like a little storm. He let the silence stretch and didn't interrupt it. Just sat with me in it. It wasn't his legal advice that shook something loose in me. It was his tone, the belief in it. The way he said respected like it was a given, not something I had to beg for. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a charity case. I felt like a person again. Someone with weight, with history, someone worth protecting. When I stepped out of the diner, the air felt warmer than before. Spring soft, the kind that carries lilac on its breath and sunlight on your shoulders. I had coffee in my veins and a little bit of hope in my chest. He held the door open again as I left. "You know," he called, "you still owe me pie." I smiled over my shoulder. "Only if you promise not to bill me for that coffee." He laughed, and the sound followed, me down the steps like a blessing. I walked a little slower than usual, but not because I was tired, because I didn't want to rush the feeling. It wasn't just the coffee that warmed me that day. It was being remembered, not as a burden, not as someone passed by, but as a woman with a name, a story, and a damn good apple pie. I sat on the edge of the bed, wool socks warming my toes against the cold floorboards, and just listened. The heater had kicked off, humming its little lullaby like it always did around this time. The last drawer had stopped creaking. Even the old dog downstairs had curled back into sleep. The house was finally still, and somehow that stillness wrapped around me like a shawl. Not comforting, exactly, but clear. Final. It felt like the walls had been holding their breath for years, and in that moment, they finally let it out, as if even they knew. It was time. I breathed in the night. Air drifting through the cracked window beside me, the scent of early spring, cool and damp, kissed the edge of my throat like a goodbye I hadn't said yet. I looked at the small pile of things waiting at the foot of the bed. It was time. Not to fight. Not to run. Just to leave, quietly, like someone closing a book. I opened the first box slowly, careful not to bend the flaps too hard. It had been sitting folded in the back of the closet, waiting. I chose carefully, only what was truly mine. My grandmother's quilt, faded and patched, still holding the scent of cedar and warmth. The cookbook I'd scribbled notes in for decades, little circles around cinnamon measurements, comments like Ellie's favorite, extra vanilla, a box of letters, all in his handwriting, the ones he'd written before life got noisy. Those went in first. I passed over the framed photos. They weren't mine anymore, not really. And truth be told, I don't think anyone would notice if they were gone. It was funny, what I didn't pack. All those gifts I gave them over the years. Birthday. Money, holiday casseroles, rides to school, none of that fit in a box. But I folded what I could, and everything else? I left it, because it had been forgotten long before I decided to go. I stood in the kitchen, the lights off, letting the moonlight pour in through the window. It was 4 a.m. The only sound was the second hand of the clock above the fridge. Tick. Tick, tick. I didn't leave a note, not because I didn't have words, but because I'd already said them, just not out loud. In the dinners, I kept warm. In the laundry, I folded. In the way, I never asked for more than space. There was no anger left in me, no drama. I didn't want tears or questions. I just wanted peace. I walked to the fridge, touched the magnet I used to hang Ellie's drawings on. Then I let my hand fall. Some goodbyes don't need to be spoken. Some doors don't need to be slammed. Some endings arrive like breath, soft, necessary, and final. I loaded the car slowly, like I was tucking parts of myself into something new. There weren't many boxes, but each one felt like a chapter. The quilt, the letters, the bits of myself I'd quietly held onto while letting everything else go. The air outside was crisp. My breath fogged the early morning dark. Birds hadn't started yet, just silence and the soft crunch of gravel beneath my slippers. I placed the last box in the trunk and closed it with a gentle thud. That sound echoed louder than any argument we never had. I stood there a moment beside the driver's door, hand on the handle, heart beating soft but steady. I wasn't afraid. Not this time. This wasn't a runaway. It was a return to something I hadn't claimed in years, myself. The door didn't creak. It didn't resist. It simply closed. The latch clicked into place like a punctuation mark, not a period. A full stop, and it felt like applause. Not loud, not dramatic, but dignified. I paused on the porch. The stars were still out, faint against the early dawn. The air smelled like dew and wood, and something new was just starting to unfold. I didn't cry. I just felt full. Not of regret, but of release. I looked back at the house once, not expecting anything. Not hoping, just acknowledging the chapter that had ended. And then I turned, quietly, and walked away with nothing unfinished trailing behind me. The road stretched ahead, empty and soft in the early light. The sky was just starting to blush, pale, pink leaking into the edges. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, My coffee thermos sat beside me, warm and untouched. I glanced in the mirror and watched the house grow smaller. It didn't hurt. Instead, something in my chest expanded, like lungs learning how to breathe without a weight sitting on them. I didn't know where I'd land. Not exactly, but I knew one thing. I'd be the one to choose. I'd carried so many people for so long. Their needs, their schedules, their feelings. And now, finally, I was carrying only myself. And that felt like flight. The key was cold in my hand, silver and simple, without a tag or chain. I stood there for a moment on the porch, the early fall air wrapping around me like a shawl that hadn't been touched in years. The trees stood tall and golden around me, the scent of pine and dew rising from the forest floor. When I turned the key, it didn't fight me. It slid into place like it had been waiting. No creak, no hesitation. The door opened gently. Inside, it smelled like bare wood and possibility. Quiet, clean, mine. No one had to tell me I was allowed here. No one had to give me a bed or a corner or a time limit. I stepped in slowly, breathing in the space like I used to breathe in pie fresh out of the oven, for the first time in a long, long while. I didn't need permission to belong. I already did. I picked yellow because it reminded me of butter melting on hot cornbread, of sunshine on old curtains. Not everyone would have chosen it. But I did. The paintbrush dragged softly across the wood, one steady stroke at a time. I didn't rush. Let the breeze lift the ends of my sleeves, let the scent of rosemary from the fresh-planted bush by the steps drift up and settle in the air. I planted it for myself, just because I liked the smell, not to impress a neighbor or dress up the place, for company. I ran my fingers through the leaves, smiling at the way the oil clung to my skin. I didn't write my name on the door, but I didn't have to. The yellow said enough, the rosemary said more, and every brush of green against my fingertips felt like a quiet, fragrant declaration. This is mine. The fire popped softly, like it was whispering old secrets. I settled into the rocking chair, the one I'd found secondhand but loved instantly. Its arms curved just right. Its back didn't argue. I held a mug of tea close to my chest and spoke aloud, just to hear my own voice echo back in the room. It didn't feel silly. It felt like remembering, like meeting myself again. "I'm all right," I said softly. "I think I'm going to be all right." The fire didn't answer. It just kept crackling, dancing shadows along the wood walls. No one cut me off. No one corrected me. And in that still flicker, I found room to exhale. Deep and slow. The cabin didn't ask for explanations. It just let me be. And my thoughts, usually so tangled, started to soften. Not all of them made sense, but they didn't have to. They were mine, and they were enough. I set one plate down, one bowl, one napkin folded just how I liked it. There was stew in the pot, thick with carrots and potatoes and thyme, and a slice of fresh bread cooling on a dish towel nearby. I didn't rush. I didn't watch the clock or check the door. I just sat, picked up my spoon, and took my time. I hummed a little tune I hadn't thought of in years, something my mother used to sing when she stirred gravy. The food was warm, rich, and simple. But the real flavor was something else. It was peaceful. I looked around the kitchen, small with mismatched chairs and a curtain that barely covered the window, and I smiled. I'd eaten alone before. Many times. But this was different. This time, I wasn't lonely. This time, it felt like a quiet celebration of choosing myself, of coming home. The kettle started to whistle and I chuckled. All right, I hear you." I talked to the kettle now, and the rosemary. I read poems aloud in the living room, sang while sweeping pine needles off the porch, and no one told me I was too loud, or too much, or not enough. The windows were open, and the breeze carried the sound of the trees rustling like applause. My voice filled the cabin like a forgotten melody. And I didn't quiet it down. I let it echo. Not because I needed an audience, but because it had been silent for far too long. I was never meant to be a whisper. And in this space, this simple, cedar-scented space, I gave myself back the freedom to be full volume, even if it was just for me. It didn't come with applause. This piece I'd built, no one handed it to me. No one cheered when I planted rosemary or when I finally finished painting the trim around the back window. But here it was, tucked into the folds of everyday life. On the way, the kettle hummed, in the warmth of the stew, in the swing of my own voice. I didn't earn it through apology or performance. I claimed it, gently, one soft act at a time, and it stayed. As dusk crept in and the porch bathed in lavender light, I stepped outside with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The wind carried a whisper of chimney smoke and pine. The world felt quiet, but not empty, still, but not stalled. And I sat there in it, not as someone waiting to be loved or asked or needed, just as someone who had built a piece that asked for nothing but presence, and offered everything in return. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, sealed with a small circle of wax. The lawyer placed it on the polished wood desk, like it was fragile, though we all knew it wasn't. My children learned in. Curious, quiet, their faces unreadable. I didn't try to guess what they were hoping for. I just watched the envelope sit there, neat and square, holding more than numbers or signatures. It was heavier than it looked, because inside was not just paper. It was the weight of all the years I'd sat at tables where no one asked how I was doing. The birthdays I remembered, the holidays I cooked through without thanks, the goodbyes they gave with indifference. I didn't reach for it, didn't blink. I just waited, still, calm, while the clock on the wall ticked behind us like it had somewhere else to be. This was the moment they didn't know they'd been walking toward, and the moment I stopped apologizing for arriving first. They expected a thank you. They thought I'd hand over the house, the savings, the land. Quietly, without question, as if love meant handing yourself over until there's nothing left. As if loyalty meant swallowing whatever bitterness they fed me and smiling while I did it. They didn't expect a change, but I had changed. Not all at once. Slowly. Like how? Ice melts into water when no one's watching. I'd rewritten the will long before I packed my boxes. Not to hurt them. Not out of spite. I did it to protect the part of me that had survived them. The version of me that still believed in fairness, in memory, in a woman's right to keep what she built. They looked at the envelope like it was a trick, but it was the most honest thing I'd done in years, because sometimes love means giving, and sometimes it means stopping. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was smooth, practiced. He read the legal phrases with precision, but it was what he didn't say that filled the room. My son's fingers drummed once against the armrest, then stopped. My daughter-in-law blinked more often than necessary. They didn't expect to hear what they heard. The land goes to me. The cabin, the savings, divided differently than they assumed. Not out of punishment, but preservation. The words landed like feathers, soft but not light. No one shouted. No one argued. But I saw the twitch in their jaws, the shift in posture, the unraveling of assumptions they'd wrapped around themselves like armor. He read to the end, folded the papers gently, and looked at me. "Would you like to say anything?" he asked. I shook my head. There was nothing left to explain. They'd heard everything they needed, and I had already spoken, just not in words. They didn't say much. And that was fine by me. The silence that filled the room was familiar, like an old coat I'd worn too long. The same silence they'd given me over dinner when I asked how their day was and got a shrug. The same quiet I sat in during birthdays, with forgotten candles and rushed phone calls. Now, they had nothing to say, and I didn't need them to. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfying. It was symmetrical. They inherited the same silence they'd handed me all these years. And now, it sat between us. Not bitter, not cruel, just true. I folded my hands in my lap. Let the moment pass. Not everything needs to be loud to be heard, and sometimes silence answers louder than any word ever could. I stood. My chair didn't scrape. I'd worn soft soles on purpose. I nodded politely to the lawyer, offered a quiet "thank you," and turned toward the door without looking back. I walked out with nothing in my hands, but nothing missing from my heart, either. There were no papers I wished I'd kept, no final hugs, no dramatic scenes. I had what I needed: my name, my land, and a kind of peace that comes only when you stop trying to explain your worth to people who've stopped listening. The elevator. Doors closed behind me, humming softly. The air inside was still. I stared at the floor numbers blinking above the doors, then caught my reflection in the chrome. I looked like a woman who didn't owe anyone a single thing. And for once, I believed it. The city sidewalk was cool beneath my feet. Autumn leaves skittered along the curb like they had somewhere better to be. The breeze lifted a strand of hair from my forehead, brushing it back gently. The kind of breeze that doesn't push, it frees. I took a long, slow breath. It didn't tremble. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt light. Freedom doesn't need fanfare. It doesn't slam doors or shout back. It just lets you walk forward without checking if anyone's following, and that's what I did. The sun warmed one shoulder as I passed the courthouse steps. My pace was steady, my bag was light, and my silence wasn't a wound anymore, it was a boundary. And I knew, deep in my bones, they might never understand what I did, but that didn't matter, because I did. The phone buzzed once, then again. I didn't need to check the name. I already knew it. His name lit up the screen like a question I'd already answered. The glow from the phone cast a soft rectangle of light across the kitchen counter, humming in a way that didn't match the rest of the room. I didn't reach for it. My breath caught for a second, yes, but my hands didn't move. It sat there, vibrating with apology or guilt or just curiosity. I didn't care which. I'd spent too many years jumping at the sound of that ringtone, hoping this time it would be different. Hoping this time I'd be seen, not just summoned, but not tonight. The soup on the stove was beginning to fog the window. The light outside was fading, and for once I wasn't waiting. I stirred the soup with slow, steady motions. My hand moved in a rhythm older than any recipe, round and round, like I was tracing circles around the past. Thyme, carrots, onion, a little rosemary I'd plucked from the garden this morning. The scent filled the kitchen, wrapping around me, like a warm blanket I'd stitched for myself. The phone buzzed again on the counter behind me. I didn't turn, let it ring, let it wander. This pot of soup needed me. The way it thickened with patience, the way it responded to care, I needed me too. I'd spent years giving my time, my food, my forgiveness before it was ever asked for. But this time, I gave myself something different. Stillness. There was no emergency in the ringtone. Just longing that it arrived too late, and that's not the same as love. Sentiment's funny. It always shows up after the damage is done. I could hear it in their voices lately, softer, unsure, like they were trying to remember how to talk to me, when they weren't needing something. But sentiment hasn't changed. It's a hand on your back when the fire's already out. I needed them when I was sitting at the dinner table alone, when my birthday passed without a call, when the grandkids hugged me out of obligation. Now do they miss me? I leaned over and lit the candle by the sink. Its small flame flickered against the evening shadows crawling across the floor. I used to crave their attention like air, but now? I don't even know if I miss them back, And that doesn't make me cruel. It makes me honest. I'd answered every call for years, even when I was tired, even when I wasn't okay. Hey, Ma, can you pick up the kids? Sorry to call late, but do you still have that casserole dish? Did you get that email about the family photo session? I always answered. Always said yes, even when their tone had that sharp edge, like I was inconvenient for existing, but useful for showing up. But this time, I didn't pick up. This time, I stirred my soup. Let the rosemary bloom into the steam. Let the scent of onion and warm bread ground me back into myself. This peace I'd built, it wasn't given to me. I'd earned it. Slowly, like simmering something low and careful on the stove, and I didn't owe it to anyone. Not anymore. The wind chimes outside, moved gently, barely brushing each other, just enough to sing. No storm, no rush. Just rhythm. I opened the window a crack, letting the breeze kiss my cheek. The sound drifted in, soft and certain, like a reminder I didn't know I needed. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't demand to be heard. They just were existing. And in that quiet little melody, I felt the lesson settle. I could do that too. I didn't need to explain why I didn't answer. I didn't need to apologize for loving myself enough to pause. I could be like those chimes, letting the world pass by, singing when the moment felt right, not because someone needed me, but because I was simply here, whole. And finally, enough, it's still there. Margaret Fields. The black letters are faded, curling slightly at the corners where time and rain have done their work. But it's legible. And it's mine. Every Sunday morning when I walk to the mailbox, I run my fingers across the nameplate. Just to feel it. Just to remind myself that some things stay, even after so much has been taken or left behind. The front yard smells like fresh-cut grass. There's a breeze pushing gently through the trees, like they're nodding at me in quiet approval. This little patch of earth may not be much to some, but it holds me, grounds me. My name didn't vanish in their silence. It didn't dissolve. When they stopped inviting me to things, or when they looked through me like I wasn't standing there, it stayed, right there on that old mailbox. I didn't disappear. I simply moved back into myself. I still send birthday cards, one by one, in careful handwriting, not because they always thank me, not because I expect them to call, but because I still believe in the beauty of a thoughtful gesture. I sit at my desk near the window with my lavender, stationery, that little drawer of stamps, and my favorite blue pen. The birds chatter just outside like background music. I write the same way I cook, simply, warmly, with intention, thinking of you, wishing you joy. Love always. Seal each envelope gently, set it in the outgoing pile, and let it go. I used to wait for responses, for recognition, for a text or a smile, or even just a sigh of gratitude. Now I don't. Because love, I've learned, isn't something you give for the echo. It's something you give because it's who you are. And some days, that alone is enough to feel whole. Sleep through the night now, the kind of sleep that arrives quietly, without questions. Without footsteps above my head or voices behind thin walls. Just the gentle creak of this old house as it settles into itself, and the soft rhythm of my own breath, steady and unbothered. The morning light comes through the curtains like a blessing, pooling golden on the quilt that rests over me. No dread clings to my chest, no heaviness in my limbs, just rest. Deep and true. I used to toss and turn, replaying things they said or didn't say, wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. Now I sleep, and in that sleep, I found something I hadn't known I was missing. Peace and isn't. That just another kind of homecoming? They said I took too much, as if keeping my name, my land, my share of the quiet was a theft. But I didn't take anything I didn't already carry. My name was mine from the start. My worth, too. My dignity. Hard won. And carefully stitched together over a lifetime. Never belonged to anyone else. I didn't steal. I remembered, and memory has its own kind of justice. I sit now at the kitchen table, tea rising in soft curls of steam. The rosemary in the window sways in the breeze, steady and fragrant. I don't argue anymore. I don't explain, because they can tell their stories. That's fine, but I'll live mine. And in mine, I didn't walk away rich. I walked away whole. The porch is warm beneath me, the sun resting gently on my legs. A bee hums near the rosemary bush, lazy and content. The wind chimes sing a soft harmony, no rush in their rhythm. I sip my tea slowly, honey, no sugar, and rock just enough to feel the quiet move with me. Life is smaller now, but it's sweeter too. I don't feel behind anymore, or beneath. I feel here. Each sound, the bird song, the rustle of leaves, the kettle calling from the kitchen, they don't ask for anything. They just are. And I've learned to be the same. Present, unrushed, enough. I chose this life, with all its silence, its softness, its space. And I'd choose it again, every time. Thank you for sitting with me through all this. Sometimes the quiet roads we take alone lead us right back to who we were all along. If you've ever had to choose yourself after being forgotten, I'd love to hear your story below. And if this feels like home, you're welcome to stay a while and subscribe.